Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I will dispense with the grim tidings of dread that currently envelop the United States, cover it like a death shroud. Oh boy. Because I want to get into today's episode. Today's guest is Josh Zetumer. That was a rueful laugh if I've ever laughed a rueful laugh before. Oh wow, I just looked. This is episode 666. What an omen. That's right, Josh Zetumer here today on the Devil's episode of Beginnings. If you don't know who Josh is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from San Diego, TV and film writer Josh Zetumer broke into screenwriting on the back of a script that got on the blacklist. This led to working on Quantum of Solace, which led to the 2014 RoboCop reboot and the Peter Berg-directed Patriots Day in 2016. Most recently, Josh adapted and showran the FX show about the Irish Troubles, Say Nothing, which was easily one of the best shows of 2024. I truly cannot say enough good things about Say Nothing. If you haven't seen it yet, get thee to your streaming device. I guess you can see it on Hulu, but it aired originally on FX. Hey, FX, pretty good channel for streaming dramas. You got Shogun last year, you got Say Nothing. Was The Old Man? I guess season 2 was last year. That's pretty good. Can't go wrong with Jeff Bridges. But I loved Say Nothing. I voted for it on every round that I could vote for it at the WGA Awards. And I think I recorded this. This is all out of order because, let's see, I recorded this maybe late December, early January. Then a tenth of the city burnt down. And that kind of screwed up the schedule. I was saying, Naomi and I were recording an episode of the Couples Therapy Patreon today. I was talking about how the fires, I think I'm just getting back to having some kind of normal sleep right now. I guess you could call it some kind of form of PTSD. I would say probably a very minor form. I wouldn't want to steal valor from people who really have gone through trauma. But, wondering if the fires will get to you, checking the backyard every 10 minutes, not sleeping for weeks on end. It does fuck you up a little bit, but it also fucks up your podcast schedule. So this was supposed to be out earlier. But not only am I a fan of Josh's writing, turns out he's a cool dude as well. His parents are therapists. We talk a lot about that. I won't spoil anything. So I just hope you enjoy this episode. Coming up on the show, holy crap, so many talks with people from the world of comics, and I've even scheduled more with comics folks coming up. But who do we got here? We got Jamie McKelvey, Daniel Warren Johnson, Anders Nilsson, Jeffrey Lewis. Who else? Oh, Bob Mould. That was great. So please stay tuned for those. Stay safe out there in our not-so-fine country. And I guess remember, folks, who do you want to be like? Indiana Jones or Arnold Tote, the Nazi who got his face melted off by God? Which one of those two do you want to be? Make your choice. But for now, let's talk to Josh. Kids?
I did always want kids. When I was young, I had named my son, when I was like 6, I was like, I'm going to have a son and name him Jason, which I thought was like a very cool name. And instead now I have an agent named Jason. So that's so corny to say. People talking about their agents are the worst. Though I do love my agent, love my agent dearly, and he is like a very, very good person. But yeah, I knew I wanted kids from a pretty early age. And then I had them, and it was like the culture shock that comes with having children, where you realize, that you have to mortgage a piece of your heart and kind of like give your life to another person. And that can be really intense. And it's definitely the type of thing where I think that anyone who wants kids, like it should be a requirement that they spend like a lot of time with very young children before having them, just to know what they're getting into. They should have to babysit for like 2 weeks. Like that should just be like a government requirement, is that you have to like babysit a child for 2 weeks just to know the hellstorm that awaits you. And I mean, I as any parent will say, like most parents talk about loving their kids, but being drained all the time, and that's definitely how it is for me.
Wait, six. Okay, first of all, Jason the Argonauts. Is that what you're reading?
I think I was reading, I don't know how old I was, but I was definitely reading a lot of Greek myths, and my dad was reading a lot of, I'd never really made that connection, but yeah, I'm sure that's what it was.
Yeah, I was a Greek myth kid, and so the minute you
Nice.
said Jason, that like perked up. I mean, you could have said like Zeus, Cassiopeia. I don't know, but like I would have been like, okay, there's where.
I want a son. I want to name him Achilles. I want to name him Ulysses. Yeah.
Hey, there was an improviser that I was with at UCB. His name was Achilles. It's a pretty good name.
It's a very cool name. Very cool name.
But okay. So here, I mean, the thing that I'm really interested on this show lately is how your desires form, specifically creative desires. But I'm very curious at 6, the desire to have kids. Like, obviously, it's not well, what is it? I was about to say it's not a desire to procreate necessarily, but like, I don't know what was that? Like, were you just seeing your parents and seeing like, oh, I like this relationship with my parents? Or
I have no idea why foolishly I wanted a son, like at age 6. I don't know. I've always really liked kids, and I can't really say what I was thinking. I had a very chaotic brain when I was a child. I'm not sure. It definitely, I would say being a parent, the thing about it that's cool at its best, it's this way to sort of re-experience some of those like early seminal moments of childhood, like through the eyes of an adult. And like they say that youth is wasted on the young, and that's very much true. That the sort of lack of awareness that comes, I think, once you are able to like look back on some of those moments through another little tiny person and sort of remember them for yourself, that part of it is really special. But I couldn't tell you why I wanted them, and certainly like it's not been a steadfast thing. It's like a lot of emotions, like it's had like a lot of seasons.
I want to get back to the chaotic brain thing in a second, but do you think were there other facets of adult life that you were that got into your head when you were younger, or was it just kids?
No, I was obsessed with being an adult. I was in this is maybe later than what you're talking about, but certainly like in high school, I was a jazz drummer, and which is like already kind of like an adult thing to do. 'Cause like, not there are definitely kids who do, but not that many like 16 and 17-year-olds that get like deeply into jazz. And so I would, as a summer job, I would like put on one of my dad's suits, and I would like go out and like hustle jazz gigs at Italian restaurants wearing like oversized clothing. And I think the people who like booked me, and there were like, I got a lot of work, and it was actually incredibly lucrative because, you would play like a night of music, which was like 2 or 3 hours worth of music, and you would get fed a great meal, and you would make as much money as you would have made working at Blockbuster, which is like what my other friends were doing. And you would make as much money in a day of working, a job like that. And I just felt like I'd cracked the code, but of course, ultimately, like it feels like you cracked the code where you're like 16 or 17 and like you're still having your parents support you. And then of course, like getting older and going, oh wait, a jazz musician actually can't make that much money at all. There was this old joke, this terrible joke about terrible joke about jazz musician, like what's the difference between a jazz musician and a large pizza? A large pizza can feed a family of four, and which is like kind of a dickish joke. But I remember hearing that and being like, "Can I swear? Am I allowed to swear?" And I remember hearing that and just saying "fuck." I think there's some truth to that, and going, okay, this in the long term, this actually is not going to be like a stable career choice. So my backup plan ultimately was screenwriting, which I think made my parents, my therapist parents, scratch their heads and say, "Do you not want a backup plan that's like a little more secure?"
Oh, yes. Okay. So this is, I need to,
I'm getting ahead of it, probably.
well, no, let's stick with this because this is interesting. The idea, I mean, you're, I think, a little older than me. So I'm kind of curious though, like what phase of jazz are we talking about here?
I mean, I loved a lot of different stuff, like a lot of my friends when I was playing. And this is like after going through the evolution of like, I mean, at first I was really into metal when I was in like the eighth grade. My first band that I ever loved was like Guns N' Roses. They were like a foundational band for me. This like the first thing I ever loved was Weird Al when I was little, and then
Yes.
and then Guns N' Roses when I was in the sixth grade, and I was listening to the music in secret. And because I didn't want my parents to hear the lyrics, which I thought were like so subversive, but like my parents wouldn't have cared at all because they were like, 60s kids who were like, therapists who were doing quaaludes in their youth and like putting on each other's clothes. So they would not have cared about Axl Rose like saying the F word. But anyway, what was I going to say? That, by the way, just for anyone listening, my parents were not putting on each other's clothes when I was a kid and growing up in the house. They were putting on each other's clothes when they were like, in the heyday of their youth and in the 60s doing quaaludes, putting on each other's clothes and going to Baskin Robbins or whatever kids during the sexual revolution did.
Why not? Why not?
Yeah.
Why not?
So
teach your child that gender is fluid and that it is on a spectrum. Why not? That these are just customs.
I definitely do that. And my kids have friends who are they, them. And that is something we do. I'm just making sure that my parents don't get misrepresented. But what was I going to say? So where were we? So yeah, I had gone through this like whole musical evolution, and that was really the first art that I ever loved. I kind of fell in love with metal when I was in middle school, and then like played in a ska band and a ska reggae band when I was in high school, being like a good San Diego boy where like ska in the 90s was like a thing, which is like deeply embarrassing in retrospect, but also it's cute. Who cares?
Josh, I had a ska phase.
Did you? Wait, what was your ska phase?
I would put on a suit, go to ska shows and skank, and yeah, I was into it. I didn't play ska. It turned out that what I really liked was horns, and then Neutral Milk Hotel came around, and I was
my God.
Oh, you can have horns in an indie rock song? Okay. I mean, I'm not totally.
Yeah.
I still think the specials are great. Like, it's not like I'm like disowning that entire phase, but I will disown a lot of the the ska punk that I listened to.
Well, that's right. We can like retcon the ska punk. I think we should retcon the ska punk. But the original Jamaican ska, like Desmond Decker, is incredible.
Right.
All the Trojans record stuff, which is like Rocksteady, all that stuff is incredible. And then there's like some well-meaning third wave ska, but a lot of it has not aged well. I will say my band was like kids from San Diego who were like deeply white, like trying to play like we were like a 60s Jamaican ska band, which like, we got to play some cool shows with bands who came through, but it was, like a lot of kids in high school, it was like it was also like deeply uncool.
Yeah. Yeah. But it gave me, here's the thing. I think when I was in high school, I was searching for an identity, and I was like, I tried indie rock and it felt good. But no one else was listening to indie rock. And then my friend got into ska. And so I looked up to him. So I tried it too. And I tried that for a little while, and then it didn't feel good. So I went back to indie rock, and I'm like, all right, this is my home. This is where This is the putting on a band. I mean, I'm still wearing band T-shirts in my 40s now, and
Who is on? But that's cool. I mean, also Neutral Milk Hotel. I still listen to that record. One of the
yes,
few records that I, listen to from when it came out to now, still with the same amount of enthusiasm. It's aged as opposed to the ska. It's aged like incredibly well.
yeah, yeah. So I think this was part of like my search for an identity, but I am curious. Like jazz is even
Well, no, and I was the same. Just to say, like, I completely agree with you. Music was the way I found myself as a kid. It was the thing. I didn't have many friends in middle school. I was like into metal, and I was like a long-haired, angry little metalhead,
huh.
and but I was practicing playing drums like a ton, and music was one of the ways that uh, I really felt like I found myself. I was standing outside the school, and one of the kids came up to me. He was like a trumpet player, and he heard that I played drums, that I was a musician, and he was starting a band. And he wasn't a cool kid, but he was like a member of like one of the Freaks and Geeks crew.
Uh-huh.
He was cooler than I was, right? And he came up to me and had heard that I played and asked if I wanted to like check out his band. And I remember like I was this very friendless, not friendless, but like I didn't have a ton of friends kind of kid, and I certainly didn't feel cool. And so to have this guy who was like in a different part of the social strata of school kind of come up to me and like invite me into something that felt so good. And ultimately, probably because I was so lonely, I was a really good musician, for an eighth grader. And so I would play for hours, and I had very encouraging parents who didn't give a fuck that I was playing drums like all the time in my bedroom, and
Were they
which was
hard of
amazing.
hearing?
No, I mean, no, they really loved it. Truly, they were so happy to have music in the house, even like the solo from Wipeout like 1,000 times in a row. so I remember he came up to me and invited me to play, and my heart leapt, and we became friends, and then that sort of became my friend group, and ultimately became the thing that I was so passionate about, and I was really obsessive with music. I was like I liked a ton of different kinds of music back then as well. And yeah, it was the thing that ultimately defined me and gave me my friendships. And for a while, I was going to be, after I got into jazz, I was going to be a jazz drummer. That was my thing. So I thought like I could make a career out of this. And then I played in a ton of indie bands as well and all that. But it was really yeah, lifelong uh, source of enjoyment.
So okay, I've had so many people on this show who had a sports dream. The sports dream died because of something like uh, an injury or something like that, and then they turned to whatever acting, comedy, writing, something like that. And I'm kind of curious. The jazz drummer dream, was it just realizing, oh, I can't actually make a living on this, or it'll be very difficult to, or did another dream push that out of the way? Sorry, in my head, I'm imagining like you have two thought bubbles coming out of your head, and the one thought bubble pushes the other out. If that
No,
visual makes
that
any sense at
No,
all.
it totally makes sense. I mean, that's basically what happened. I was when I got to be a little older, my when I got to be a little older in college, I really started falling in love with movies. I'd always loved movies and TV, but never in a way where I thought it could be a career path. You just don't really, some things are outside your consciousness. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't even aware of like screenwriting as a thing. And I had bad ADHD as a kid. So I had a lot of trouble sitting still. I never thought I'd always been a good writer. But I hated writing for school. I hated writing papers. And so the idea of being a writer, I would be like, fuck that. Like, why would I hate writing. And even if it like came like slightly easier to me, And I would write stories and things, but I wasn't one of those kids who was like going off and like writing plays. Not until I was about 19 when I decided that I would write a screenplay because I was falling in love with the sort of like creative explosion in the 90s that was happening in film, whether, Soderbergh and the Coens specifically.
Yeah.
And those movies loomed very large in my brain. And then also there was a TV thing that was happening. My parents are both therapists. It was kind of like, it was one of those houses where like even the dog was on Prozac, and everybody was medicated, but like very sweetly because they were also like a very emotional, caring family, caring parents. And it was sort of all emotions on the table all the time, and they were very helpful when I had ADHD, like when I had intrusive thoughts when I was about 11. I developed intrusive thoughts at summer camp. When I was about 11 years old, I would think the same thought like 50 times a minute. And I remember coming home with my dad and driving home, and he was like, how was sleepaway camp? And I was like, it was good. It was good. And then there was like a little pause. And I was like, I'm thinking the same thing like 50 times a minute. And I remember his like knuckles tightening on the steering wheel as he sort of realized that there was some mental health stuff that was going on. And they'd known before that wasn't the start of my like mental health journey or anything like that. Like they'd known before that I had ADHD, and they were very helpful when it came to that as well. But, which I could go into if you wanted me to, but at this moment, when I started develop, when this happened, they knew right away, he knew right away what it was. And he knew right away, like that I needed to see someone, talk about it, and probably get on medication. And he wasn't like prescribing the drugs for me, obviously, but like he ran right into the storm of having a kid with challenges. And so, that was extraordinarily helpful. And there are challenges that come with having a childhood where all emotions are on the table all the time and you talk about all your stuff. Like it's not necessarily like the healthiest thing, but it's a lot better than the alternative, sort of not talking about stuff. And
Oh,
and
you mean my
so
childhood?
yeah, well, a lot of people, yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I just did a show about it, right? Say Nothing. It was about what happens when you don't talk about your trauma, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, wait.
Wait, no, and so what I was just to jump forward. So just as far as the journey into television. So my parents were these like liberal shrinks in San Diego, and they fucking loved The Sopranos. They like loved them some Dr. Melfi in like in a very big way. It was there's like a very dark story attached to it where like when my grandmother, my father's mother, was dying, had she had gotten to a point where she needed morphine, and like this is so dark. The morphine, she was in the house. She was like on the hospice. She was taking morphine, and it was taking a very long time to work. And we're sort of all sitting around in the living room, essentially like waiting for the morphine to take effect and waiting for her to die. And it's going on for like hours, and it's hit the point of going on for like 8 hours, 9 hours. And like at some point, my dad just looks at his watch and just goes, I think The Sopranos is on right now. And we like go downstairs as a family and like watch The Sopranos and and like watch the episode and then like come back, and like my grandma dies like just shortly after that. And I'm always to this day like, Dad, like what if she had died while we were watching The Sopranos? This was like in the year 2001 or something like that, when like the show's been on for like a season or two. And I don't think he has any guilt about it, but it was definitely like that, that was the vibe in the house. And I think that was the first time I looked at a television show, I think, and thought, this is somebody who is, I don't even know if I thought this at the time, but certainly when I think now, this is somebody who's like writing about their personal shit, right? David Chase is writing about his mother on like a gigantic canvas that is, really powerful, but also pop and like deeply subversive and strange. And I think that ultimately was like what I wanted to do. I just I wanted to find a way to tell personal stories and like probably because I came from such a processy house, like process some of my own shit
Yeah.
through writing. And even if that meant writing something that was like more universal, because I think on some level I knew from a very early age, like no one wants to hear about like a half Jewish boy in a ska band from San Diego.
I see. I'm on your wavelength though, and I'm just like, I kind of want to see that.
I, no, some people are really, really good at writing about themselves in a way that is engaging for other people. Most people are not. Most people write the deeply personal script as like about their parents or whatever. That is like their first thing that they write. And I've always some people can get away with it and are brilliant at it. I've always thought it should be your last script,
Mm.
where you have enough wisdom to be able to like think about not only what would be interesting for you, but also interesting for other people. That's just my take. But there's plenty of people. My girlfriend is one of them. She writes about things that are personal and confessional, and she's truly exceptional at it. So she would have a very different point of view.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I want to
That's a
go
long
back.
answer. I'm
No, it's
sorry.
great. I love it. Don't ever apologize for a great long answer.
Okay.
Apologize for a terrible long answer.
A meandering, rambling mess. Okay.
But I want to go back for a second to how did you? Because I maybe we're close to the same age. I'm not exactly sure, but like if I remember correctly, ADHD didn't become a quote unquote thing until the aughts, really. Like it what like
Dude, this was my, sorry, I cut you off. This was my mom. This was my mom was an early ADHD advocate. And so I was there in, how old was I? I was in first grade. So I was born in 81. So I would have been six. So it would have been 1987. And I was in school in San Diego and my teacher, whose name was Miss Pica, brought my mom in for parent teacher conferences and said, "Your son is stupid," and and maybe if she's listening, she has a different point of view. This is what I've heard.
did
This is
she
what I've
say that
heard from my
that
mother.
exact phrase?
My mom tells the story in a way that where she used the word stupid, and my mom basically told her to fuck off. And she was
Nice.
like, he's not stupid. And she was like, he has this thing called ADHD. And like, essentially people didn't believe that it was a real thing. They didn't believe her, but she pulled me out of the school and actually put me in this like little hippie school where there were like 12 kids in each class or something like that. And you called the teachers by their first names. And it was like a very progressive, a school that was founded by this couple that was like out in the boonies somewhere. Um, and I did a lot better. And she sort of went in and told them ahead of time, like, this is something that I think my kid has. And she, I was probably seeing a therapist as well at age 6, which is crazy, but well, I guess it's not that crazy, but it's not crazy now, but it was probably crazy in 1987 or whatever.
Yes.
Um, and she was like, this is the thing that my kid has. He's like been diagnosed. He like has medicine. And if you don't believe in it, like don't admit him. And so, they were cool with it. And I was a difficult kid in class because at the time nobody understood how to deal with ADHD. But I wasn't a stupid. I wasn't stupid, right? Obviously, and so um, uh, and so I ended up doing a lot better. And so I'm basically like an example of what happens if you have like good early intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely, yes, it was definitely the generation under us where it became where people started to realize that that it existed as opposed to it just being a bunch of or you have a rambunctious child, or a quote unquote stupid child, or a
Yeah,
bunch of
a
disparate.
spirited child. Yeah.
Spirited is nice. Yes, di-
That's the generous term for it. Spirited.
disparate
Um,
symptoms that aren't collected under the same rubric, right? And then suddenly it becomes people realize that it is a diagnosis as opposed to these other things that we've said. But I think that really took root with the generation under us. And so the fact that I think it's really interesting, and probably due to the fact that your parents were therapists as opposed to, my mom was a teacher. I have great parents, but they're not therapists, and therapy wasn't a thing that you do in Pennsylvania in the 90s.
no, 100%. And also, like a lot of therapist kids are really messed up, right? Like that's like a cliche about therapist children is that the kids are messed up because therapists become therapists because they themselves like have crazy families, right? Often, and they're trying to understand. And so, I don't want to paint a picture of some perfect childhood with like perfectly understanding parents, because obviously, like the quote from the famous poem "Families, they fuck you up," that is an apt quote, I think, for everybody. We had our share of dysfunction, but I think in those days when it came to mental health, I was incredibly lucky to be in that kind of house.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is answerable, but I'll ask it anyway and see where it goes. How do you think you conceived of yourself when you were younger? Did you understand what it meant to have ADHD or to have a diagnosis? Does that even make sense as a question?
It does. No, totally. Yeah. And that was the thing. Now we're getting into a little bit more of the dark side of it, which was I hated the diagnosis. I hated feeling different. I definitely felt like an outsider. For some people, a diagnosis is like a balm, it's like a welcome.
Yeah.
The label is so welcome. For me, it felt so fatalistic. Like this is something that you're never going to overcome. This is lifelong. And I think when I was 15, and taking Ritalin, I was like, fuck, I'm going to be on Ritalin until I'm like 80 years old. And I had depression as well. And I'm going to be on Prozac and Ritalin till I'm, 80 years old. And instead, and I know there are probably people who have that feeling and don't have that same feeling of being sort of stuck, but I really hated it. And so I think for me, I really wanted to kind of see if I could manage getting off, and then I would kind of get off. Because part of this is very personal. This is certainly more personal than anything I've done in any interview for the show. But I've been on every antidepressant you could think of,
Yeah.
or every antidepressant that existed at the time, certainly in the like 80s and 90s and into the early 2000s. And I none of them really worked for me. They always came with like terrible side effects, frankly. And you're always trying to balance them and find this cocktail of perfect to sort of achieve this state of happiness happiness or focus that's been like eluding you your whole life, but feels so easy for other people. And I think my parents, the messaging in the house was very much like, it's okay to do this for your whole life. This is going to be a lifelong struggle. And for me, I couldn't stand that and wanted to kind of get off. And so I worked very hard to like get myself off medication when I got old enough to handle it, frankly. But that's also like, I just want to say, if there are people who are struggling with mental health stuff, like there's also like absolutely nothing wrong with being medicated your whole life. I wouldn't want to espouse the view that like everyone should try to get off their meds, because I think that for some people it is a lifelong journey, and that's totally fine. And there's some people that hate it and don't want to deal with that, and that's fine too. It's really just like up to the person. These are more just the personal feelings. Like I think living in a house where you could kind of, where there was at times a little too much, like a little too much, introspection, frankly.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the process of you like did you build kind of existential coping mechanisms to be able to deal with your depression so that you could get off whatever Lexapro or Wellbutrin or whatever you were trying
All
at
of
the
the
time?
above.
All the above.
I wrote. I mean, I played music and I searched for this sort of out of body feeling that I got while playing music. I searched for that with writing. And that's very much like an ADHD thing, right? Where you're like in a flow. And when you have ADHD, you're very much like, you're very much, distracted all the time. And then when you find the thing you like, you're like zeroed in, you're very like laser beamed in. And so I would search for the sort of like emotional high that came with like losing oneself in music and losing oneself in writing. It's way easier to do with music than it is with writing is the drag, because when you play music, you can lose yourself in like 30 seconds. And with writing, you're just like, oh God, I've got to shut off the internet. I've got to like, put on a song. I've got to blah, 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 blah. It's like so, it's so challenging to like get in it. And you're like, what's for lunch? Like, it's like it's fucking hard to find that flow state sometimes with writing. And so, but that's what I did that's what I did to, that was going to be the thing that I was going to pursue, was that kind of like that feeling.
Do you know what it is? Okay. If you're playing, like I play guitar or I play keyboards, if you're like you're like, oh, what should the next chord? If you're writing a song, you're like, I don't know about this. You could just play around on the guitar neck, and you can even just like put your fingers somewhere. If you write the setup to a joke, say, if you are in the middle of a script and you have the setup and you're like, oh, what's the punchline? You just kind of sit there. Sometimes what I do is I just type like not even words, just like I just hit the keyboard to try to keep in that flow state.
I've never tried that. That's a good idea.
It's I don't, it's more like a nervous tick than it is anything else. But like it does kind of at least keep me engaged, and so I don't just sit there and be like, okay, does someone else say this? Don't I have to? Because you get stuck. Or like, do I have to change the setup? Because now I can't think of a punchline, and they're all like, do you know what I mean? Like that kind of like you just hit this brick wall in the same way, in a different way that like if you have an instrument in your hand, you can just keep kind of like fucking around with it.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's totally right. It's when you have an instrument and you're playing along with a song, you're not going to stop.
Yes.
You're in a flow because the song is a flow. The notes are like flowing into each other. And yeah, when you're thinking up dialogue or you're thinking up prose or whatever, it's like it's very easy to just stop and be like, what's the next word? So yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's why some people write longhand, causes you to like write slower. You know what I mean? So you're sort of like you have to slow down just to like get your thoughts going. I don't write that way, unfortunately. It's much more romantic, but
I hate that idea because I can't type fast enough to go with whatever's coming out of my brain.
Yeah,
and
no,
so
I'm the same way.
That would be awful.
Yeah,
it's like a nightmare.
Yeah, totally. No, but well, the only other thing I would say, just on the ADHD tip, is I actually really believe, oftentimes a person's weakness is their strength. And so I think with ADHD, the sort of like ability for hyperfocus, and then also when you like, if you look at Say Nothing as a show, right, it moves like incredibly quickly, and it's got like 30 or 40 years worth of history that it's condensing into its 9 episodes. And at times it just propels you through the history. It like bullies you forward through the history without stopping to catch its breath at some times. And so much of that came from the natural process of like trying to sort of condense all this history into 9 episodes. But a healthy portion of it came from having ADHD, came from getting bored incredibly easily as a show creator, right? I just like I get bored so fast. I wanted it to move like a rocket because, because I sort of couldn't sit still. And if you read the scripts, they're like they're, they're not, they're incredibly tightly written with like, many of them with like very fast, punchy scenes and like a zillion setups, right? And it became incredibly difficult to film because they were so ambitious on the page, just with how many times you have to change the camera for every time you have a new scene, or there's something visual happening in the scene that informs the dialogue. And my scripts are very visual and very dense. And so it was very difficult to pull off in the shoot. But I think what you're left with in the show is this sense that, it just moves like a rocket and it
Yeah.
just, it just goes fast. And that had a lot to do with my upbringing, which was very much like psychologically minded parents and then punk. It was like shrinks and punk are like one of the things that shaped Say Nothing.
So okay, so Freud and Henry Rollins are
Freud, yes, Freud, yes, that's right. Freud and Iggy Pop.
so okay. Well, I mean, I almost never talk about like the actual process, but like of making the like once I usually stop once someone is in like college or something like that, and I want to go back to your parents in a second, but I am curious about did you bring this? Did you articulate this in the room? Where you're like, this is how I want this to go? Or did you already come in kind of being like with a plan of like, how, here's the episodes and like, is it 9? I know this is a lot, but like, and your line producer is like, you can't do 10 the way you're doing it. You can get 9 out of this. Or did an executive,
Well, no,
did
because
Landegraaff come down and say,
Landgraf, no, I mean, there was a lot of talk about, how much we can do. And there was, the budget was a huge part of it because I would be lying. If I said we got like a ton of money to film the show, like we got a good amount of money, for by anyone's standards, right?
it looks great.
But no, but this is the thing. I am immensely proud of this. It looks great. It was a very, very small budget for a show with the ambition that it has, and ultimately a huge part of it was managing my very outsized ambition for the show with like the money that we had. And so the question of how many episodes and all that, like and what you can put in each episode, the budget was a huge part of it. But I had written the pilot, the first script before the room started, and the pilot moved incredibly quickly. The pilot was very much like, that style. And so as far as the sort of like structural blueprint for what I wanted the episodes to look like, that was there. And I appreciated so much once you got to episode 3, it could finally slow down and breathe a little more. And that, which, a lot of which was, that Claire Barron's doing, who wrote episode 3. I think I was trying to do so much setup in the episodes in the first 2 because we had so much to get through by virtue of how much history there was. It actually needed to move really fast. And by the time we got to 3, it was really nice for the show to finally just like exhale into slightly longer scenes. That was the episode that needed to be the first time you really get, other than some of the McConville storyline, it was the first moment for Dullers where you really get like a huge emotional gut punch in taking Joe Linsky across the border. And
Yeah.
so in order for that to land, you needed to spend time with them. You needed to really breathe. And so,
Yeah. That's rough.
yeah, totally. No, and there's obviously like a ton of emotion packed into the first 2. Everything at Burntallet Bridge is super emotional, and I'm very proud of the tonal dance and the kind of shifts that are occurring in the first couple as well. So I think for me, when it came, and as the showrunner, you end up doing work on pretty much all the episodes. I worked on I worked on all of them, obviously, as a producer and as a showrunner, and but as a writer, really worked on all of them pretty much except for episode 6, which is like one of my favorite ones and was sort of a very complicated episode, and with that one, I it was also in it was this is maybe more information than you want. It's also like it's on gender lines, like an incredibly like female episode, and some of the stuff that was happening in it is so tied to the sister's experience that I really wanted. I think Claire had such a specific vision for the writing of it. I was really invested in the tone of it and really tried to protect it. And I think some of we broke it in the room, but so much of that episode was really Claire's was really like Claire's vision for what the script should be. And then I was really adamantly trying to protect that, which included this sort of like like super narrow aperture on the sisters and the sort of like emotional intensity of the episode. Those are the two things that I was really fighting for in that one. And it's
Yeah.
it's one of the best ones. So
Yeah. Okay. So
anyway, sorry, I'm getting
no, no,
away from
no.
it. I'm getting away from it.
I'm because I just never ask those kind of questions on the show really, but I am curious about other people, I've not been on a ton of sets or produced much, but like I'm very curious about the actual process. So, okay. I am very curious about your parents because you said maybe too much introspection before. And as
Oh,
someone that grew
no.
up
Oh, no. We're
with,
going back to that.
yeah, because I grew up with very little. Again, I feel like I need to say this every time, loving parents, but we didn't. There still is to this very day. As I've gone through therapy, I've still, see a therapist for, over a decade now. And my parents have not. So there's this unbridgeable gap that is there from the beginning. And I am curious, in what ways was there too much introspection? Because that seems nice to me, that there would have been a lot of talk about emotions when there was very little to none in my household.
No, I don't know. I think my parents they're super lovely, and I would give the same disclaimer that you gave about them. I think, if you have a house where like the word hostile is bandied about the dinner table, it can get kind of annoying sometimes, if the expectation is that you're going to talk about your feelings. I also think it can make you slightly neurotic, right? You're always questioning yourself, always wondering, like, am I doing that because of this, or am I doing that because of that? And I think that can be the case as well. I think I don't know. I think it's I don't have a deeper answer, I think, for the perils of introspection. I think you're asking a good question, and unfortunately, I have specific things with regard to mental health, around labeling, that I mentioned earlier, that are challenging for me, and a sort of like, I think the thing I struggle with is like a fatalistic attitude towards mental health. I think I would prefer to think of things in a slightly more fluid way,
Mm.
I don't know what the truth about ADHD, for instance, if it's something that you can kind of out quote outrun, or something that is forever kind of like kept at bay in the back of your mind. I know that writing for a lot of people is like a fight against distraction. That's not something that is unique to people with ADHD, right? Like you're very much, when you're writing, as I'm sure like, I'll use a program called Freedom to turn off my internet, right? So that I actually can't go online and distract myself. I use it for like a 30 or 40-minute block while I'm doing something. And I think beyond that, see, my phone just rang. I just got distracted just now. But so I don't even know in what capacity, like where the mental health stuff stops and the rest of me starts at this point. I don't know like what shape it takes, because some of the things that I struggle with are just stuff that are problems with the modern world we've
Yeah.
set up, you know what I mean? And so, and I think this idea of like, well, you'll always have this thing and you'll always struggle with this thing really just didn't sit well with me I think also I'd go even deeper if we're going to do like a deep dive into it. I think as an ADHD kid, I was told no like all the time because I was like, slightly out of control as a kid, just a little bit out of control, like a tiny bit. Um, and so being told like don't do that, like watch that, check that, like stop yourself, all of that stuff like over and over again, I think probably made me like a little bit more of a, of a contrarian and a person who's into control, frankly. um right, this
Yeah.
is, and by the way, you know who told me this? My fucking dad. So like that's the problem with too much introspection, right? Is when you have a parent who like, he told me this when I was an adult. He's like, I think this happened, but like he's totally right, of course. Like I'm super into control, which is why like being a showrunner was actually like a great fit, a great use for that like personality defect. But like ultimately I think it probably came from just, being a kid and being told, no, no, don't do that like over and over again. And so yeah. So now I've forgotten what the question was to begin to begin with.
No, it was about too much introspection,
Well,
but
yeah, there you go. When like you have a parent who's like making his kid, even like his adult kid, aware of his own psychological processes, even if that person is totally right, you're still like, don't do that. Don't,
yeah, but
don't do that.
let me argue this. Let me just argue the other side of this for a second because it at the very least you are given a context to try to understand yourself
Yeah.
as opposed to where I was just kind of in this soup of existence and trying to let me go with a miasma of existence as opposed to soup because
That's good.
all I was imagining right now was in a bowl with like carrots and potatoes and I'm like I don't like that. So just like me in a mist of trying to like find my way without there being any kind of boundary outside of rules, outside of what you're supposed to or not supposed to do, as opposed to what you're supposed to be or not supposed to be. Outside of like, I mean, I'm third generation immigrant, so I'm supposed to be doctor, lawyer, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling against that kind of stuff. And I'm struggling against like rules. So I'm pushing back against rules because I'm like, oh, I don't know if that rule is right. I don't know if I should, that doesn't apply to me because but not essentially what I'm struggling for the words to actually articulate this, but like not the boundaries of the self, if that makes any sense at all, or if that's just kind of esoteric philosophy speak. There were social boundaries, but not existential boundaries, I suppose. Whereas it seems like you got existential boundaries and then could kind of like push against, well, I don't know if this is right or I don't know if this is correct for me. And you could then, there was at least a dialectic in play, whereas I'm still in this mist. Does that make any
No,
sense at all?
it does. You used the term existential boundaries, right? And that's how it felt. It felt like I was sort of put in a box. And as a kid who was told no all the time, I was like, fuck the box. Like I don't want to be in this box. And so I made my own major in college that was a cross between writing and psychology. And I studied music and film on the side. I ended up minoring in film, but I really bristled against, I think, um, being put in any sort of box. And I think that's true as a creative person. I'm really restless and I've done, work in every genre as a result. I've worked on sci-fi movies. I've written I've written on a romantic comedy. I've worked on horror films, which was one of the things that influenced episode 6 actually was having worked and loving horror films um, and as well as like big action movies, like on the Bond franchise or whatever, and as a result, like I think that creative restlessness, I think it's very much like I saw. the person I probably idolized more than anyone was like Stanley Kubrick, right? I mean,
Mm.
obviously he's absolutely brilliant, but the thing that I loved about him most of all was that he was so fucking restless and he worked in like every genre and it was like impossible to put him in a box. And so, he's obviously like a very brilliant guy, but like, that fundamental restlessness was something that I thought was so special. And so I loved that about Say Nothing. And I'm not comparing it to a Kubrick film because that would be idiotic. But like, I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is the way that it sort of mutates and shapeshifts over the course of its 9 episodes, where you have like the first episodes in this sort of like buoyant energy of like episode 2, compared to episode 6, which feels like a horror film, episode 5, which feels almost like a heist, almost, from a genre perspective, a heist you have deeply mixed feelings about. Um, to the like straight drama of like episode 8, where like there's not really genre even at all. I mean, there is, right? Because there's sort of a genre heartbeat to the whole show. But certainly, like when you get to episode 8, it just feels like at least to me, it just feels like a very human drama, down to the sort of darkness of the final episode. That so much of that was shaped by this like restlessness and this desire to not be in the box. And even from the casting of the show to the from the casting of like people who feel like real people who are young, who are less well known, to the period ambitions and the fact that the show is like not one specific thing. It just sort of like exists out in the world. It's like not a thriller. It's not a drama. It's not anything in particular. I think so much of that, some of it came from the book, and a huge, healthy portion of it also came from not wanting to be in the box.
Josh, it seems like a great place to end. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is really fun. This is a deeper dive than I've done in any interview. So hopefully it will go well. Hopefully it will be well received and not embarrassing.
Absolute delight. No, not embarrassing at all. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, 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 bye.